Hello. In this episode, I will be talking about what UK tanks I think Gaijin will implement in the UK tech tree. In this episode, I will be talking about anti-aircraft vehicles and medium tanks. In part 2, I'll be talking about heavy tanks and anti-tank guns. Okay, a tier 1 anti-aircraft, I believe we'll have this. It's a Mark 6 light tank, armed with twin 15mm machine guns. These were built in 1938, I believe. But if this one isn't implemented, probably its brother, this one, armed with the four Besa machine guns, which to my knowledge, was definitely used in North Africa, providing light anti-aircraft capabilities, but most have been used for anti-infantry purposes. This is the Crusader gun carriage, carrying the 40mm Bofors. This is from 1943, so this will probably be a Tier 3 anti-aircraft vehicle. Tier 2, you'll probably have the lorry-mounted 40mm Bofor cannons. This will be very good anti-aircraft, just like they'll be the same as the 40mm guns in the German and the Russian tech tree. Okay. And at Tier 4, I believe this will be used. It is the Crusader armed with the 20mm Auckland cannons, like what's fitted on the Spitfire. These were used in limited numbers, but were eventually cancelled due to the fact that the Luftwaffe was no longer providing a serious enough threat for these to remain in service. It's the same problem with later tanks, and that's the reason why we stopped developing them. But this was to provide light anti-aircraft capability, light anti-aircraft for armoured columns. Now at Tier 5, there are only 2 of these made, to my knowledge, and only one saw active service in Western Europe. Like I mentioned earlier, if the cost of the Luftwaffe wasn't causing a serious threat anymore, we stopped designing. There were going to be more built, but like I said, the Luftwaffe air superiority, it was no longer required. But it has 20mm, 20mm cannons. They will shred planes apart. You know how the Typhoons and all that do now. Imagine that shooting up at you. And this will be it. It was mostly used for anti-infantry at this time, when the one reached Europe. It was designed in Canada, funnily enough. So, one up to the Canadians, I think. If it's not, and I do believe it'll probably be rank 5, if they do implement it, that is. Like I said, only one was ever used. Now, for lower tier, medium tanks in the British tech tree, I believe we will mostly become across the cruiser tank line. This started off with a Mark 1. They were built in. It entered service in 1938 and had a top speed of 25 miles per hour and was armed with the 2-pounder gun. This was adequate at the time. There was the Mark II, which was heavily armoured with a faster firing gun of the same calibre, but was slower. Cruiser Mark III. This was still armed with a 2-pounder quick-firing gun. The speed was upped though to 13 miles per hour. Nothing much had changed really in the tank design, so I can't really think of anything else to say about this one. But at the Mark IV, still not as much changed. Sometimes the Mark III and the Mark IV actually get mixed up. This still armed with a 2-pounder quick-firing gun, and it still has a speed of 30 miles an hour. Now the Mark IV will probably be a low tier 2 tank. The other one's been tier 1. But the Cruiser Mark VI, also known as the Crusader, will probably be a good solid rank 2 tank. Had been brought in service in 1940. You'll probably have two types, the one armed with the quick-firing 2-pounder gun, and the one equipped with the 6-pounder gun. This obviously had more penetration, but lacked with probably not a good shells. But Gaijin will probably put that right and probably put good ammo for it, I hope. It had a good speed of 27 miles an hour. This will probably be a good tank for rank 2. Fast, with a goodish gun. It did struggle with Panzer IVs though. And then we get into the cruiser line. Yeah. When we get into the Mark VII. The Cavalier, which was brought in service in 1941. This will probably be a rank 2 tank again. It was armed directly with the 6-pounder quick-firing ordnance gun. Then there was the Centaur, which was brought in service in 1942. Firstly armed with a 6-pounder anti-tank gun. There was one armed with a 3.7-inch howitzer though, but we probably won't get that because it was an anti-infantry gun. And then there was the Cromwell. This is quite well known in British tanks in World War II. It was brought into service in 1943, so probably a tier 3 tank. It was initially armed with 6-pounder gun, then upgunned to the 75mm quick-firing ordnance gun. This is a gun that it was most famous for. This is a Challenger. Not from the one from the 80s, but the Second World War one. This was a Cromwell armed with 17-pounder anti-tank gun in a redesigned turret. It still had the same mobility. It was slower than normal Cromwells, but could keep up. That's why they were made in small numbers, but they were made specifically to go with Cromwell units. That's why they were still being produced in World War II. But for the famous World War II tank, you've got to look at this, the Firefly. 17-pounder armed Sherman. This thing could take out Tigers, Panthers. I don't know what ranges, but they could take them out quite easily. They were normally the first thing to be targeted as well by German gunners. Interesting fact is, 17-pounder guns actually mounted in sideways, so it could actually fit in the turret. But this was easier to produce than the previous tank. But like I said, it was tried not to put in with Cromwell units because it was hard to supply them with parts. That's why they were mostly with Sherman armed units. And then there's this, the Comet. Brought into service in 1945, so this would probably be a rank 4 tank. It is armed with a 77mm quick ordnance firing gun, so it can dish out punishment. It's quite fast with a maximum speed of 29 miles per hour. This did serve in Korea, so I believe it will be a high rank 4 tank. But it did lead up to the design of a very special tank to most people's hearts, and that is this. The Centurion. Depicted here is probably the Centurion Mark III, armed with the 20-pounder gun. There were later ones armed with the 105mm gun, but I don't know if that will be in the time period allowed. This was tested in 1945, 2 days before the end of the war in Europe. It has a claim to fame to be the world's first main battle tank and served in Korea, and derivatives of it are still being used today. It's the UK's most successful tank export, been exported to all Commonwealth countries and many others, and derivatives of it are still being used today. So that was this for this episode. I'll see you next episode for heavy tanks and tank destroyers. I'll see you there.